Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some updates here today. Donald Trump's approval rating, even after some faulty polls, is looking amazing. You look at a second term approval. We've also got these liberals trying to cope. Remember, they initially said, well, it's a recession. It has to be. That's the reason inflation is going down. Well, now they realize with the new predictions on the GDP growth, they understand that's not happening. So now they're just making things up out of thin air. You can see the U.S. has collected, they report around $22-23 billion in tariff revenue in May, collected $22 billion in tax that Americans paid. Oh, Americans paid, did they? Is that why core inflation is at its lowest rate in 4 years? That's the metric that would represent the taxes being passed off as a burden to consumers. Like liberals initially said, they said, well, this is going to, it's like the most cookie cutter thing. It's a lot more complicated than this. But they said, well, because you're putting in the tariffs, the corporations are going to pay for it. They're just going to raise their prices. Well, no, that's not how it works in a capitalist society where there's competition. Some of these corporations, they cannot raise their prices. Otherwise, they're going to be priced out. So a lot of them haven't raised, and Trump has threatened some of them saying if you raise, the margins are going to be slimmer, but they're going to have to eat it. We don't have a rise in inflation. This answer by these liberals, and it gets like 90,000 likes, it is not backed up by any viable. Sure, when you're talking about the idea of tariffs, there's always going to be an effect. You put tariffs on, things cost more for companies. There might be a slight price raise, but it would be represented, and this is why they have no argument. There's zero actual argument. Where's the tangible numbers? Where is the argument? There's none. Because core inflation, it's not even like, oh, core inflation has leveled off. No, it's at its lowest point in over 4 years. We're going back to COVID when it was basically at zero. Now it's at 2.1%. The Fed says, well, if it gets to 2.0%, that's when the rate cuts come. They have a target. Now, the trueflation is at 2.0%, but that's a little bit more volatile. But the point here is there's no argument. No, okay, why don't you show me an actual data from metrics that encompass the entire economy, that this is the correct representation of what the tariffs are doing in terms of them passing off the burden to American consumers. It doesn't exist. That does not exist anywhere. And it's not even that it doesn't exist. It's gone. The metric that would represent it is at its lowest point in over 4 years. That's how dumb these people are. And then, so now, like, it's the exact same thing with the whole taco stuff. You don't like the Trump tariffs. Okay, so Trump takes the tariffs off. Now you say you try and make fun of him saying he chickens out. Did you want the tariffs on or did you want him off? They don't care. They're just going to criticize him no matter what. And that's the point with these people. That's what you have to break it down. We've got Besant coming out and saying that the Biden administration put crypto on a path of extinction. Well, the Biden administration were total dinosaurs. There's no ability to adapt to the modern world from the Democrats, and there's no embrace of crypto. And crypto is a great thing when you're talking about a hedge against inflation. Bitcoin, there's 21 million. Now there's only 19.5 million in supply. There can never be any more Bitcoin. It can only go down in terms of the amount that gets burned. There's no creating more Bitcoin. But it just goes to show you that the last administration, these people are dinosaurs. There's no innovation. There's no ability to adapt to the modern world. Oh, inflation dropped to 2.1% in April. What? They told me that the consumer. Well, listen, if you're telling us $22 billion was passed off to the American consumers, why is that not represented in inflation data? So see how it's a constant lie? Personal income increased 0.8% per the White House. There is simply no way to fix the federal deficit that isn't extremely unpopular. We either have to severely cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security or hike taxes through the roof. Well, no, normally what they'll do a combination of the two. But there's also the idea of creating a Bitcoin strategic reserve. There's also the idea of going after offshore accounts that are skimming in taxes. You know, the Biden administration, this was what the Democrats said about the deficit and how they were going to cut into it. They said, we hired 87,000 IRS agents, and that's how we're going to cut it. Okay, so first off, there's a thing called law of diminishing returns. Because their entire argument was based off of, well, because in terms of tax revenue we're going to save, for every dollar that we pay an IRS agent, we're going to get a return of $5 to $12. Do you remember that statistic? That's what they said. And they said, well, we're going to make up so much in terms of the tax fraud and finding it because we're going to hire 80. I don't even know how you hire 87,000 IRS. They couldn't have all been IRS agents. I mean, that's insane. But there's a law of diminishing returns. No, you're not going to be able to generate $10 per every dollar you pay an IRS agent if you hire 87,000 of them. And out of those 87,000, how many of them are going to go after middle-class people? Probably about 80,000 of them. Do you really think 87,000 of them are going to go after the same 5 billionaires, really? And the same 5 billionaires that probably already know people within the government to where they're going to get around taxes no matter how many whimsy IRS agents you hire. So see, but with something like this with the federal deficit, I mean, it can be worked out, but no, I agree. I mean, there has to be major changes. I always tell people, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, that's half of the budget alone is the 3 entitlements. Social Security is going to have to be reformed. I think it'll be done in a way that's good. I mean, we just don't want to raise the retirement age. That's the problem, is they're talking about doing that. And in the United States, I think raising the retirement age to 69, 70, it's not satisfactory for a country in terms of how rich we are that we should be forcing people to work till they're 70. I don't believe that. But I also don't believe the current way Social Security is. It's terrible. The money should follow you. You should be able to invest it into the S&P, into the NASDAQ 100, into bonds, rather than, if you're in the workforce right now and there's a 6% tax on Social Security, the money is going to the current retirees. It's not going to follow you, and then when you retire, you're going to have that money. That's not how it works. And it worked when they implemented it, because they implemented it almost 100 years ago at this point. They implemented it in 1935. And we had a lot of workers. And so that's why we were able to generate a fund. But the fund is running out of money, and that's the whole point. It's going to run out by 2033. That's the problem with Social Security. The government loses money off of that, off of Social Security now, about $100 billion, because of the amount of workers that we have. People are living longer, and this is the reality. So it's like we tax people at 6%, we lose money. That's the problem with Social Security. But Medicare, Medicaid, there's massive fraud in that, but it's just such a negative thing. I mean, this is a correct, or you hike taxes. I mean, what Democrats would say, well, we're only going to raise taxes on ultra rich people. That's what they'll say. And normally that ends up not working. It's a catastrophe, especially in a capitalist society. There has to be an incentive structure in place to allow people to get wealthy. I mean, there are ways, though, I agree, to manipulate a capitalist society because of the wealth inequality, and that's what's going to happen within capitalism. There's no perfect structure. People say, well, capitalism's not perfect. Yeah, no kidding. You think anything is? You think tariffs are perfect? There's always a yin and a yang when you're talking about economics. But what you can do is, because some people are just extremely wealthy, you could put more of a burden onto them. But there's an equilibrium that has to be reached to where it's not too high, but you could put more of a burden on them because they're just so wealthy, and that could potentially pay for some of it. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's always going to be a combination. There's always going to be a tax hike on certain people. But what liberals will say is, originally they said, well, if you make under 400K, we're not going to tax you more. Then they said, well, now it's only under 100K, when in reality with inflation, I mean, now 100K is, depending on where you live, 100K in San Francisco is nothing. Absolutely nothing. So people act like, oh, you make a lot of money, you make 100K a year. Depending on the city you live in, especially with the inflation now, ever since 2020. I mean, they said we've got a total inflation increase since 2020, since the pandemic, of 28%. That's the total number. And when you see something like that, I mean, it just goes to show you that 100K really isn't that much now, depending on the city you live in. We've got Karine Jean-Pierre coming out and saying that she left the Democrat Party. She's released a book. People are saying it's a psyop. She's doing it for publicity. She's doing it to sell her new book. I don't care. This is fucking hilarious. I mean, the former black lesbian press secretary has left the Democratic Party like 8 months after leaving the White House. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. We've got Donald Trump saying, I like President Xi of China, but he is extremely tough and hard to make a deal with. Well, no, I agree. And that's the thing with the Chinese is, they've already to a degree limited the reliance they have on us in terms of trade. Certainly when you're talking about a trade war, we're always going to be the beneficiary in terms of, well, technically you could argue there's no beneficiary, but eventually when we get a trade deal worked out, we're going to be a beneficiary because we're going to work out a better deal. But in terms of who gets hurt more in a trade war, China will get hurt more than us because they have a surplus with us, meaning they're reliant on our consumer base more than we are of theirs. But the point of it is China has already decreased their reliance on the United States going back to 2018 when Trump first implemented the tariffs, but they're still reliant on us. And I think we both want the same thing. But China, they're honorable people. They're not just going to cave into us. This is going to be a grueling negotiation. It's going to take months and months and months. And I mean, listen, this is one of those things to where Trump is probably going to have to extend this deadline because they put the deadline of 90 days in, just like Trump did with all the other countries. But this is a different type of scenario. And maybe there's like a preliminary trade agreement that could set up an even bigger structure for a more wide-scale trade deal. But when you're talking about a trade deal with China, normally something like that, it's going to take months and months and months and months to iron all of that out. But you could do some type of preliminary deal to agree on certain things and then work out the details. But the point of it is it's complicated when you've got a trade deal with China. There's no doubt about it. Trump saying it's too late for Jerome Powell. He must lower rates now. Yeah, I mean, listen, if we actually do have a reading of 2.1% core inflation, that's basically the 2% Fed level that they wanted. That's their target level to lower the rates. We have the GDP at around a 4% growth rate. They're going to cite the contraction in Q1, but now we've got the projections on quarter two. It's amazing. And they're also going to cite the tariff situation and the trade wars, which right now are really not wars considering it's only 10%. And it's not like we've gotten reciprocal from other countries. The only reciprocal tariffs we got was the Canadians when they did it. I think they took them off. Yeah, they basically took all of their reciprocals off on us except on certain sectors. And then there's the Chinese reciprocals as well. But we're not in trade wars. I mean, if there's a trade war, yes, with China, it's a trade war. I'll agree. But even though it's been paused, even the China's one has been paused. It's not like we're getting reciprocal tariffs from these other countries that would create some type of trade war. Although I think the EU did tariff us in response. But the point is this. Look. We work out these trade deals. The vast majority of them, they need to cut. They have to cut. At this point, it's almost malpractice. If these trade deals get worked out and we get a positive quarter two GDP, you have to cut. And they're going to have to cut in September. I said they're probably going to cut in September now. We were looking at June. We were looking at their meeting on the 17th. Trump is pushing for cuts. It seems almost impossible they're going to cut on the 17th. If you look at the betting, I know people will talk about the betting, but the betting can change. People are saying, well, if you look at the betting, technically, like, let me look at this. I'll show you guys what I mean. Federal interest rates. Fed decision in June. I'll just show you guys what I mean. So it is June 18th, and there's a 98.6% chance of no change. July 30th, 79%. Oh, okay. The 25% increase is rising a little bit for July 30th, September. They're going to cut either September or July, but it's basically August because it's the 30th. So it's basically early August or mid-September is when they're going to cut. That's what I would say. Because we originally thought they were going to cut in June. But you could argue, well, it's because of the tune that's been sung by the Fed on the tariff situation. But I mean, the crazy thing is the data has been so great, and originally we were looking at a 25% or 0.25% decrease. But they want these trade deals to be solved. I think that's what it is. They want the trade deals to be solved with little inflation increase. I mean, but if we've seen a recovery in terms of the stock market with virtually no inflation increase outside of the energy, which slightly went up because crude oil went up, and I mean, to me, I think we're in a spot right now to where the cuts should happen hopefully by July 30th. Worst case, it has to be the 17th of September. Worst case, the cuts come. And there's going to have to be 3 or 4 cuts, hopefully within by mid-2026 or by really Q1 of 2026. Hopefully there's three different cuts. That's what I would say. And then also, I almost forgot to look at this. We've got Trump's approval rating. So the Trafalgar +8 definitely helped Trump. You have Rasmussen. I mean, these are Republican pollsters, but that Atlas Intel was such an outlier. Such an outlier. You've also got Yahoo. Yahoo's got to be... I mean, what is Yahoo's survey database? How much money do they invest in that? That's like online poll. I mean, all these are online polls, but TIPP is good. They're -2. That's not bad. Morning Consult -5. Not terrible. Trump sitting -2.5. Yeah, I mean, that's just that Atlas poll, and there's a few others. Like this Marquette will get taken off. Yeah, the problem is this insider advantage is going to get taken off of the composite, and hopefully there's another positive one, but that's going to hurt significantly if that gets taken off. But I mean, if you get a -10 taken off plus 11, maybe it cancels each other out. Maybe we get a better rating from Reuters, although I wouldn't hold my breath. There's no way Trump is sitting -10. That's an outrageous rating. I mean, realistically, I could understand if you're a liberal pollster and you've got him at like -3. But like -10 is pretty crazy. I'm not saying he's +11 either. But I could say +11 is more accurate than -10, I would say, at this point for Trump. I mean, look at all the positive stuff with the economy right now. It's insane. And you had the disapproval go up. We knew that was going to happen because of the tariff situation, but it's come back, and his approval is still way better than it was pretty much at any point in his political career, outside of right when he entered, where he got it. So we'll see what happens with it. I mean, there's a lot of unknown with these geopolitical events with Israel, Palestine, with Russia, Ukraine, but congressional vote Dems +2.5. Yeah. Again, you've got that Atlas +9. That Atlas +9 is just... but even if you compare this back to Trump's first term, the generic ballot looks a lot better for Republicans. They've got a phenomenal Senate map in 2026. Yeah, let's take a look at the generic 2018. Yeah, they had Dems sitting +8.5. It's not even close to what it is now. What was generic 2024? Republicans might have... Yeah, Republicans +2.7. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you like the video down below. Also, follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.